Welcome to the Lonely Entrepreneur podcast series called Perspectives. I am Michael Dermer, the author and founder of The Lonely Entrepreneur. For those of you who don't know me, The Lonely Entrepreneur was born from my own struggle of watching the healthcare business I built over 10 years nearly get destroyed in 10 days during the financial crisis of 2008. And it was my change in perspective that not only allowed me to rebuild and successfully sell our business, but also propelled my company to become an industry pioneer in healthcare. In our podcast series, we will help you with the one issue we all face, the struggle, by changing your perspective on the business and personal issues we all face. We will share parts of the Lonely Entrepreneur methodology, crazy stories from our journey, and interviews with well-known entrepreneurs. We've been in the trenches and know that passion and grit is not enough. Having the right perspective helps you be a better entrepreneur and can be the difference between success and failure. To learn more about how I overcame my struggle, visit us at lonelyentrepreneur.com. And remember, the difference between success and failure is your perspective. I hope you enjoy this episode. This is Michael Dermer from The Lonely Entrepreneur, and I'm thrilled to be here with Adam Sandow, who, thanks for being here, is the CEO of a lot of things, not the least of which is many publications, right? Luxe Interiors Design and New Beauty and Interior Designs and Worth Magazine, as well as has his own creative agency and has done lots and lots of different things. So first of all, thanks for taking the time today.
My pleasure.
What's really interesting about a lot of the things that you've done is it sounds like that this started for you back in your 20s, like back in, can you take us a little bit back to Hollywood and even some of your early ventures? I mean, how did you start your kind of entrepreneurial journey?
Well, you know, I was an entrepreneur from the time I was a kid. Both my parents were entrepreneurs, so at an early age I understood all the good things and all the bad things about being an entrepreneur. I was absolutely drawn to business. I would play store with my friends. We would pretend we were business people. I loved business from an early age. I also liked computers and technology, and I was growing up. My dad was in the printing business, and I grew up just at the dawn of the Macintosh and the laser printer and desktop publishing, and I saw kind of how they used to do it at traditional magazines and newspapers and graphic design firms. They have the old style of typesetting and manually creating the design. And then I saw this new technology emerging. It was a laser printer and a Mac. And I saw this big shift. And when I was a senior in high school, as I was entering college, University of Miami, I bought a computer on a little bit of a whim, and I thought I'll start a typesetting business, but only using this new technology. And I built a typesetting business that turned into a graphic design business, and then really quickly turned into a publication, a media business. So we started a newspaper on Ocean Drive on South Beach. It was almost like a poor man's Ocean Drive, way back in the late 80s.
Did Wolfie's still exist back in?
Wolfie's existed, and South Beach was just. This was 87, 88, 89, really just its resurgence was starting to happen, and I loved business. So I was a business student at University of Miami. And
now, in your dad's printing business, was he an entrepreneur? Did he have his own business?
He had his own.
So you were around it from a kid?
As long as I was able to understand what my parents did, they were entrepreneurs. And I always appreciated the independence he had. And when there were struggles, he had struggles, and when there were great times, he had great times. But he always answered to himself. He never came home complaining about the boss. And I took a lot from that, and I never wanted to be in a position where I would ever find myself really having someone that was, in many ways, guiding my destiny by having to report to someone.
So when you were at the dinner table when you were a kid, do you remember times about talking about the struggle? I mean, did that ever come out in your family life?
All the time, and I would see the struggle firsthand because they had a small business, and there were peaks and valleys, and I would see the struggle with employees. I would see how he would deal with things. My mother was also an entrepreneur and had a little ad agency, and I saw how they managed separately and differently. At times they worked together, at times they were separate with their own businesses, but they always had this. They'd come home and we would talk. So I would see the struggle constantly.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had a brother that really, at a young age, eventually got into fishing and is today a commercial fisherman, has a boat in the market. And so he's an entrepreneur in his own right because he's got his fish market and a really booming stone crab business. So I think he also learned it, and he does it a little bit of a different way than I do. But I saw the struggle. It never scared me because I liked the independence. I liked that at the end of the day, their destiny was in their hands. And no matter how bad things were, and things were at times I remember being really tight, there was always a way out of it. There was always a way to maneuver out of it, and they did it successfully and provided a really nice life for my brother and I.
So let me ask you a question about that. You say there's always a way to maneuver out of it because, one of the things you always talk about is that while entrepreneurs don't have capital and resources and distribution, they do have the way to think differently. And we're going to talk a lot about that in your businesses in a minute. But was that something that just from a very young age just gets ingrained in you? That's just another way to figure it out?
It's been hardwired in my head since I was a kid to think differently. I know it's a term Apple popularized and people use, I think sometimes too much. But I am wired that way from the day I started. Everything I always did was different. I would look at traditional industries. I started a typesetting business that delivered type to graphic design firms. And I said, well, why am I doing that? Let me just be the graphic design firm. I did that. I said, well, there's more opportunity to create magazines for other people. And that was really the first thing I did. And then when I realized how much money they made selling ads, I said, well, just make magazines. And I don't know many people who start off in typesetting or a graphic design firm that gets into media, and then from there we've done a lot of other things. But as you want to grow bigger and build more value, you realize that there are different kinds of value related to different kinds of businesses. Yeah. Service businesses have others and have certain value, and media have others, and I got it that way. So I think differently. I've been a creative person all my life, frustrated designer or architect, wanted to be an architect when I was younger. I think the edge that I've always felt that I've had is kind of equal right brain, left brain. Again, sometimes an overused term, but really applying really different thinking, creative thinking, but applying it to business and having kind of the right brain, left brain working in unison. But that's when I'm at my best. That's when I'm happiest, when I'm building and creating or growing, but tying it right back to metrics, numbers, financials, and making it work as a business model.
What's really interesting about that is a very prototypical split that most people can't do both. If you hear the stories about New York fashion brands that had these iconic creative leaders, and until they brought in real operators that thought about process and all that stuff, but that's something that is pretty rare, right? Because you have entrepreneurs that are fashion, doctors, technologists that come in that have great value that they can bring. But then when it comes to running a P&L or understanding how to prioritize or build business process, do you think that were your parents different like that? Was one more process and one more creative, or did they both kind of instill in you different bits and pieces?
I think they both did. Did both. I think my mother had more of the right brain, left brain. She was very creative, very artistic, but was a tough businesswoman and could build a business at the same time. My father was the people person. My father was the guy that could go out and build companies and get people to follow him, and he was a personality and was the ultimate sales side. Right, so I take that sales ability, that people ability, and merge it. But yeah, it's critical. And then as you grow, as you become a bigger organization, you need to bring in specialists. You need to build a team around you that can help you take all of those things to the next level, operations, financial.
So talk to me a little bit about kind of coming out of high school into college.
Well, I started, like I said, the summer before I started school, I started this little typesetting business. I think Kinko's was my first customer. We did resumes. And when I started getting so many resumes that I couldn't actually type them and design them, I hired speed typists that would just literally enter the data, and then I would go format it really quickly, and I made great money. And I had this insatiable appetite to grow, so this typesetting business started to turn to a graphic design business. As I entered school, and joined a fraternity and had a lot of fun in school, South Beach started to come about, and I said, well, there's an opportunity there, and I opened a bar with a hotel owner on Ocean Drive, though I'm not a big drinker at all, and I was underage to even drink in the bar. I had this bar going that was very successful. I had the typesetting business turning into a media business, and I had about 25 employees, and about I think through my second year of school, I was working so much in the business, I couldn't keep up with school, and I was paying for school myself. University of Miami had this, it wasn't financial aid, they basically allowed you to take the entire annual cost of school and break it into 12 payments and pay it. And it was a very expensive payment. Happily doing it, but I couldn't keep up with everything. I had a great social life in the fraternity. I remember buying a Corvette. It was one of my proudest moments as a kid. Buying myself a Corvette and owning a bar and having all this great fun. But I remember going to the University of Miami, the dean of the business school, and I thought, this is going to be great. They're going to be proud of me. I'm not doing as great at school as I'd like, but I've got 28, 30 employees. I've got multiple things going. They're going to love me, and I'm going to go and see what can I do to maintain the full-time student program where I have the ability to pay for it, the way I was paying for it, and get credit for being an entrepreneur, which today, every school embraces it. And the dean, I had never met him before. I go into his office. I knew I was in trouble where every square inch of this guy's office was football crap everywhere. It was football. I don't think this guy knew how to run a lemonade stand, to be honest. I think it was the assistant dean, or maybe it was the dean.
But of the business school.
I remember his name. I'm not going to mention it at the time. But this guy's just football. This guy's loves football. And I went to him and I explained my situation, and I said, look, I've got this and this business. Look at me, employees. And an older guy, and he leans back in his chair and he said, son, you got to be a businessman or a student. You can't do both. I said, really? You think that I should make a decision? You can't do both. You got to make a decision. I said, all right, I'll leave. So I left University of Miami.
What year was this in school?
This was probably 89.
And what year were you in? Your second year, or?
I think it was like end of my second year.
Yeah.
I don't even think I started the third year. It was a little.
Yeah.
And I was irritated as hell because I'm like, how on earth? I'm in business school.
Yeah.
And I remember the time my big complaint was that they had all these prerequisite classes that were just theater, and at that time, this is now 88, it was computer class. Like, this is a hard drive, this is, believe it or not, I mean, you go back, this is a floppy disk, this is RAM and ROM. Like, I knew this stuff for years. So I started the business. I went full time and built my business, and went on to build real consumer magazines. In fact, I came to this building in, 91, 92 with my first real consumer magazine idea. And Time Warner was the preeminent distributor of magazines. And I remember coming to this building, going to that security office I'm sure you went to coming up here, and meeting with a lower level of person and trying to convince them to take me on because I couldn't launch magazines at a big distributor. I met a young woman that loved my idea. I said, we're going to get behind you. And I couldn't believe I convinced Time Warner. We got the deal.
And what magazine was that?
It was a magazine called Honeymoon. We realized that the bridal market was such a massive market, but carving out the travel side, the honeymoon side, we thought was a fantastic niche. We thought, put a magazine on the newsstand called Honeymoon next to bridal magazines. Not a big leap to think people will buy it. Anyone buying it, we know, is planning a trip, and we got a very targeted audience. But we thought differently. At the time, most magazines were subscriber-based. I said, forget subscribers. Who's subscribing to a Honeymoon magazine? It's something you buy on the newsstand. We priced it more expensive than anyone else in the newsstand in our trade because I knew, again, you're not buying it. You're buying Honeymoon. Time Warner got behind me. I think their logo in my first few issues was bigger than mine because I was very proud. I went down to St. Thomas and sold my first ads myself and built that up into a really nice company and loved every minute of it and was creative and blazing new trails. I thought of new formats of ways to sell advertising. Everything about it was different. It just wasn't a regular Me Too magazine. And said, well, this is how do you build real value? A graphic design company, you're a service business. You're only as good as your current customers. It was a media company, and I felt great with building this media business, and it was a lot of fun.
Well, what's interesting is that a lot of the foundational things for you were almost a fait accompli, right? You're in early stage in high school, you're seeing your parents. So for you, the idea is, I mean, you're saying them very nonchalantly. I paid for my own school. I decided to drop out. These are things that like, you're like, almost like, of course, that's what I was going to do. Yeah. Most entrepreneurs are sitting in this very building going, I have an idea, but I've got a wife or I've got a this and that, and I'm going to try and decide what I'm actually going to do about it. So
there was an extraordinary amount of freedom in being young and being an entrepreneur, because I always knew I could blow this whole thing up. The whole thing can blow up, go up in flames. Go back to my parents' house,
right.
Got a roof over my head, start over.
Yeah. And
I had enough confidence that I would say, this thing can burn tomorrow off. I'll do something else, and I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
As I built this company, you don't, though you always have that, at least, you hope you have that comfort level. That wasn't an option. Failure wasn't an option. Now you was getting married. I was older. You're not going back in your 30s to your parents' house. I mean, you can, but it wasn't when you're 21, fine. When you're 34, you don't want to do that. So starting this business, failure wasn't an option, and that's a great motivator.
Yeah.
I've always worked so much better under pressure. So that was a great motivator in making sure you don't fail.
So when you think about, one of the things that we talk a lot about in The Lonely Entrepreneur is the ability to think differently. That, the difference between success and failure really is your perspective. A couple different things really interesting. When you think about, things like BeautyDNA, right? Beauty and data is not the first, like if you walk down the street and you said beauty, how many of 100 people on the street would say data? Tell me a little, that's just a completely different way of thinking about things. Tell me a little bit about your thought process behind that.
Going back even further, we started a beauty magazine, so we identified a fantastic niche, and we built a very unique kind of beauty magazine. A year or two into it, we realized, this is back now in 2006, if women will spend $10 on beauty magazine, which is what we priced it at, very expensive, I bet you they'd pay to actually try products. So we created the TestTube, which was the precursor to every one of these subscription programs that are out there now, that are now kind of commonplace and frankly even getting boring, and the model was the darling, now it's passé. We invented that in 06, 07, and built a huge, our beauty subscription business was bigger than our media business, but we had this credibility of the platform. DNA was the next step of, it's all about data. How do you decode what the right product is for a woman? You can go online and look at reviews, you can sort by most popular, but with hundreds of thousands of beauty choices, how does a woman know what's right for her? And what we did is we have an unbelievable editorial team in New Beauty. One of my first employees in the company, who ended up becoming the editor-in-chief of New Beauty, brilliant. And I said, look, let's figure it out. Let's bring computer scientists together with editors and see if we can decode it. If we can look at a product, look at a consumer, and figure out how to connect. And if you look now at what's going to come in the next 3, 4, 5 years, it's all about artificial intelligence. It's all about beyond algorithms, right? It's machine learning, and that's going to change everything we know about virtually everything. It's going to change business, and it's all the more reason why today thinking differently is not even a strategy. It is the strategy. Yep. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a giant corporation and you're not really focused on innovation and thinking differently, you're going to be roadkill so fast.
Well, think of it, it's so cliche now to talk about, Kodak and Blockbuster and, things that jumped off the page, right? Yeah. Films online and digital, that behemoths back in the day that had all the resources in the world.
Well, it's the great book, right? The Innovator's Dilemma, right? How do you blow up your current business that's making money and profitable and keeping shareholders happy to take a shot on something new?
Yep.
Today business is so much harder than it was. With all the tools to make it easier to get into business as an entrepreneur, it is so much harder.
Yeah. And even you have more capital, but at the same time you have more capital, you have competition from Dubai and Shanghai and all over the world, and
you have competition. You have countries that instead of countries like China that were 50 years ago agricultural based and a lot of farmers. You've got countries that are building millions of engineers, millions of brilliant people. They're minting them every day. It's getting harder and harder to compete on a global scale. And not only that, everything is at your fingertips. You want the greatest service on the planet, you get Amazon, you have Amazon Web Service. You want unbelievable legal service, you've got a web site for it. You've got state-of-the-art technological telecommunication services on a subscription basis. You've got Salesforce on a peanut, a couple dollars a month to start out a business. You've got state-of-the-art CRM. So, as an entrepreneur back then, you had to figure everything out yourself. Yep. Now you're like, well, we go to Amazon for our this, you go to Salesforce for this, you go to 5 or 10 different companies, you've got everything. So now there's no barriers, there's no walls. Look, you've got.
Right. So in some ways it's easier, but in some ways it's harder because more people can get in, right?
It's easier to start something or to do something. It is way harder to make it successful. Yep. Every great idea, there's 50 people chasing it. It is so competitive, and I believe that, and I talk about this a lot. This is nothing compared to the next 5 years or 10 years, when you've got artificial intelligence that really takes hold. And forget trying to find great employees and brain power. You're going to have AI writing articles. You're going to have AI designing buildings. You're going to have AI developing products using data. That's really scary. And you've got to make sure that you can think creatively to compete. This was the right move. And it's tricky, especially when you have a real company with lots of employees. Yep. You have to have those guts, and it's early when you're smaller and you can fail and go home and rebuild. But when you have a family and you can't fail, it's tricky. You've got to have the right constitution. You really do.
It's funny. I always tell the story after I sold my business about how my family went to South Africa, but I never tell the story of the 20 times I didn't think I was going to make payroll. Yeah. Or the times that I was walking into the office with a couple hundred employees during the financial crisis with this business we just built, with a smile on your face. You go to your desk and you go, they have no idea.
Yeah. That is.
And that's part of the loneliness, right?
That's a true entrepreneur, right? Yeah. When you have that and you don't crack and you don't fall apart. And, I mean, I know in the recession it was really tough. We were in media, and I didn't want to. We were one of the few guys that didn't do layoffs. We didn't cut salaries. We didn't do things. Employees are critically important in business, and they want to feel they're working for a fearless leader. And someone's got to be fearless. Yep. It's sometimes like I watched this documentary on, believe it or not, airplane crashes 10 years ago. And one of the most incredible things that I took from this documentary was it was on a particular plane crash that was particularly horrific. And the pilots had lost all hydraulics. They were landing a giant airplane with no hydraulics. And the pilots knew they were crashing. They knew they were crashing. Yeah. And the whole documentary was basically a horror telling of this tale and everything else. And they had pretty clear cockpit because they're talking to the tower. They were literally over the airport. And these pilots were calm and not panicking. And you watch this and you're like, wow, like these guys are, I mean, this thing cartwheeled down the runway in flames, everyone died. Yep. But they brought it in, they were calm. And that was like a true pilot, And I remember I was on a plane, a cheapo airline that started years and years ago. And it was a young pilot with this, and we hit really, really bad weather, and the pilot started freaking out, cursing in the thing and panicking, and you lose, So you get into pilot that, like, we know we're going to cartwheel in flames, but we're going to do everything we can to try. Yeah. And so it was pretty incredible documentary.
It's almost so you got to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right?
You have to have nerves of steel. You've got to definitely be comfortable being uncomfortable. You've got to not show your cards. It's like I said, those are the times when the rubber meets the road and you've got to come through. And it's really, really hard. But you can't. You start getting on an airplane and we're all going to die. Yeah. Oh, pray for us. Everyone panics and you have no chance.
What's really interesting that we have a chapter in the book called "You're Always on Stage" as CEO, and I remember in all of the years, those 2 years where my company was collapsing, I always had a smile on my face. Yeah. Even with all the things going on, private equity, family money, employees, and one day a customer had told us they're going to stick with us, and then they called back 2 weeks later and said, listen, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. We can't. And I pounded my hand on my desk, and I threw a little rubber baseball against the wall. And 2 weeks later, 2 years later, after we'd sold the business, employee said, we never freaked out at all until you banged your hand against the desk. And I was like, really, 2 years? But you don't realize, like, one of the things that I don't think entrepreneurs realize is that even if you're just the technologist, or even if you're just, you are the CEO, whether you want it to be or not. And people are always looking to you for guidance and to feel like they're going in the right direction, even if there's no real reason they should feel that way.
I mean, that's one of the many roles that an entrepreneur has to play. Listen, staying, grace under pressure, right? Isn't that and look, you've got to use that to your advantage and make the right decisions. And not every decision is right, but it's what you have to do.
You talk about how you're interested in having your daughters go into the business. Do you still feel that way? And what do you do? What are they, 9 and 12 now?
Yeah, 9, almost 10 and 13.
10 and 13. Yeah. So at this age, tell me how you're exposing them. How do you feel about them becoming entrepreneurs?
First of all, it has to be in you. I'm a bit, my views have changed on education and the whole world, when you actually are really out in the real world, right? And originally my views were, I want kids, straight A students, Ivy League, and what you really realize is you've got to see what's inside of a kid, right? Not every kid wants to go to Ivy League school, not every kid wants to be a doctor, not every kid wants to be an entrepreneur. So first and foremost, and I say it to my wife, who went to Tulane and is a lawyer and has done some incredible things and is involved in the board of the school and everything else, and she comes from a family of doctors and great education, and I said, she want to be a dancer, she want to be an artist, and I want my kids to do what is in their heart. I want to guide them and expose them to everything. And I think being an entrepreneur has to be wired in. It's like being an artist. I don't know. You can't teach yourself. You can become better, but you're either an artist or a musician in your gut, or you're not. Taking a few classes in school is not going to make you it's got to be to make you champion, right? Got to be pre-wired. So I would love for them to do what I do, to be an entrepreneur, if it's kind of pre-wired into them. And it seems like it is. My younger daughter is super creative. My old daughter is not only creative, but it's got a great mind and personality.
What are their names?
Sarah and Samantha. But it's, to me, you've got to expose them to everything and really see what is in their guts. Because I think a lot of people today want to be entrepreneurs, but it's really not. Not everyone's wired for it. Just like not everyone's wired to be a surgeon or a ballet dancer, and I think that people say it all the time, but you got to do what you love and be passionate about what you do. And I think people that don't do that are kind of miserable. I couldn't imagine just doing a job that I didn't love. There are people that have the simplest, a job that you might think is mundane that they love, and that's amazing. If you love what you do and you're passionate about it, it makes you happy. It's great. So but they're exposed to a lot of the business, especially my older daughter. Every time we're together, I give her a lot of examples, or I point things out to her. We talk about the business, and she's getting it like I got it from my parents, and I think they'll find their ways. But I'd love to see them. I'd love to work with them. One
of the things we say is, being an entrepreneur is not a job; it's identity.
Yeah.
And so one question that I've asked everybody I've had the privilege to talk to is, so is there a happiest day and loneliest day? Like, obviously it's such a journey for you from such a young age. Do you look back and go, wow, there was that day that we were on top of the world, or wow, there was that day where we were on the bottom of the world? Do those things stick out to you?
No, I'll tell you why. I'm always looking forward. I really am. I'm always looking at the next thing we're going to do, and it's why we don't sit still. I mean, I could have started New Beauty, stayed in Boca, 25 employees, done fantastically well, cut out at 4:30 every day, led a great life, built a great asset, made plenty of money. but I love building. I love the build. I love the growth. So to me, I always. The only analogy, and maybe it's a weird analogy, but the only analogy that I've ever had, I'm also like a swimmer, like a long distance swimmer, and I swim as hard as I can, and then sometimes you stop and look up, and you're like, wow, I can't believe how far we've gotten. But then you put your head down and keep swimming. Yep. Other times you look up and you're like, shit, we didn't get very far. Yep. And you go back, and I think that it's that same thing, right? It's just head down, swim as hard as you can, and you pop up, and sometimes you pop up and you're happy, and other times you pop up and you're disappointed. But I don't have, I have a good friend that sold his business, and he said, the absolute greatest day in my life is when I saw that bank balance, when I saw that money in the bank, and as I've had success and I've seen things grow, that doesn't, it never gave me that satisfaction that I thought that it would. And if I sold everything today and had a bigger bank balance, that would not be this is the greatest day in the world. And as I've seen those people after a few years, they're like, well, now what am I going to do? Yep. And they get back in and they do some great things. So I love building. I like looking back. Our great days is when I've been employed. It's been me since, some of my 3 or 4, certainly my 3 first employees, number 1, 2, and 3 are all with me. That's great. To this day, and I love, we'll talk. Remember when we were in the
war stories, right?
Yeah, so I take a lot, and as I've grown, we've added people to that. So it's great when we look back and go, remember when, and so I take a lot of pride from that. But I it's the growth. That's the thing that keeps me going and keeps me excited. And if we didn't have that, then it would be. It would get old.
So for you, it literally is an identity, right? It's who you are, and that just gets reflected in, like you said, if somebody wrote you a big check, that'd be fine.
Well, I've tried to build this platform also to be a long-term platform. I didn't go down the typical routes of, okay, we've got some success, let's bring private equity in to really ramp it and then sell it. Yep. Specifically because I want to build something long-term on my terms, and I don't know where we'll be in the future. There's certain entrepreneurs, and I hate to refer to Richard Branson because everyone does. His diversity of businesses is what I always admired, right? But you can start a record company, but have a soda company or a lending company or a bridal company or a train company. Some successful, some not. He's had plenty of failures. But the diversity of what he's been able to build is exciting, and I love that, and I think
and that's what Good to Great would say the opposite, right? So Good to Great would say pick something you get good at. If you look at your materials business and the publications and Fred Siegel, right, very, very diverse.
So I go with right in the middle, and because that's absolutely right, and there are times that I'll sit and I'll watch CNBC and there's an entrepreneur on, and they have one single thing in their business. Yep. You look at Casper, right? Mm-hmm. They sell foam mattresses. Yep. They do one thing. They acquire customers, they make them really happy, they sell foam mattresses, and that's what they do. And then maybe they add dog beds. Yep. And I sometimes go, I can't imagine. How great would that be? Yep. If I woke up and I had one singular thing to do. And frankly, in many ways, that is a better path. It really is a better path. And I think most people would say that. In the beginning, we were diversified because I wanted insurance policies. I didn't know if the beauty magazine would work, so I started a home magazine. Yeah. I didn't know if print would survive, so I started a sampling business. I did it in the early days as a necessity because failure wasn't an option. I wanted multiple engines on the airplane, so if one goes out, we're flying, and that was a great strategy. There was a few years back, 3 years back, we got way too diversified. We got into too many things, and it was a distraction. And I think, and the reason I talk about kind of, you got Richard Branson on one side and the Good to Great book on the other, and I like to be right in the middle is, to me, it's choose the industry, go deep in the industry with a variety of things. So the singular focus on an area, and then build multiple things to service that industry that all work in unison, but are different enough that you can build a hell of an organization. And that's a big shift that's coming for us next year in this company is, okay, so what's our unifying mission and how do we kind of align ourselves to do that. And all the things we're developing right now kind of all tie that in together.
Yep.
And that's where I get kind of the one focus. I mean, it used to be tough, and it's still sometimes tough to explain who we are. If you started this interview and said, so explain Sandow. It's a mouthful, it's complicated, I'd go into 9 stories, and they would kind of all make sense, but it's not an elevator pitch. And our goal is to streamline a little bit so we can, in a few sentences, say this is who we are. But the diversity of what we do and how we get there is what's exciting, because I don't think we are not building one thing. We're building we want to service an industry.
Well, I think it really goes to show that even though entrepreneurs this identity, right, there are different paths go about it, right? And you talk about, others would say stick to one thing, others want to be really diversified, and you really do have to, when you look at his identity, you actually find where you are on that continuum.
Yeah.
You might get easily bored by doing the same thing over and over again, and that's part of it. That's part of making you energized about getting up every day, and then the diversity of having to run lots and lots of different businesses, and hopefully it's hard.
It's super hard.
Yeah,
it's super hard, and certainly as an entrepreneur, if I was starting over tomorrow from scratch, I would focus on one area and go deep, and when you master that area you focused, you expand out from there.
Yep.
But yeah, you can't get too diversified, and I think it's tough. I mean, look, we're a 12-year-old company that's been around. We've been able to build some great brands and great businesses. It's easier as you get bigger, but certainly as an entrepreneur, it would be a tough strategy to say we're going to do 9 things.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think, listen, it sounds like that you're covering, right, culture and commerce, and that wraps up a lot of it. But I really appreciate you taking the time. It's really insightful stuff. I think one of the things that entrepreneurs don't understand sometimes with somebody that's had your level of success, they kind of look at it from afar and go, yep, he went from this, and there's just a hockey stick growth, and it goes up, and they don't understand that I don't know if you do of any entrepreneurs, like you talked about some of the wealthy folks that you talked about that's on the Forge 400 that sat somewhere at home going, holy shit, this might not work. And that's almost the nature of the beast, as opposed to just looking from afar, to your office on 6th Avenue going, oh yeah, but they had it easy.
It's for sure. Looking from the outside, it always looks great, and look, we've been very fortunate, and we've worked our tails off. My staff as well as me. But yeah, it's from the inside. It's nothing is easy out there. Nothing is easy. So it's been a great ride.
Well, listen, I really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Perspectives, the podcast series from The Lonely Entrepreneur. You can find this episode and the show notes at lonelyentrepreneur.com/podcasts or at lonelyentrepreneur.com in the menu section entitled Podcasts. Our goal is that each time you interact with The Lonely Entrepreneur, you gain a perspective that helps you become a better entrepreneur when you go back to your desk that day. To do that, we provide a series of tools at lonelyentrepreneur.com. Thanks again for listening, and remember, the difference between success and failure is your perspective.